Okay, we'll give time for our attendees to come in. The number will grow exponentially, I can tell you that much.
I love seeing this. Welcome, friends. Big Westers. Is that what you're called? The Big Westers?
I mean, if you want to call us that, that's fine.
I'm gonna
I'll
start
take
calling all the Big Westers.
the big Westerners, yeah. So, I mean, I'll probably cut that part of it as its own separate thing, and just so Jen Frye called us the Big Westers.
Big Westers. So I coached with Dave Niffen, who is the head men's volleyball coach at UC Irvine. I coached with him at Illinois. So in 2011, years ago, years ago.
That seems like years ago.
2011. Were y'all alive in 2011, Evan and Vanessa? Were y'all born?
Yes, very much alive.
Yeah, 10 years old.
10 years old.
Excuse me, 10 years old. Jeff, we were about that age, right?
I was 18 in 2011, I think. Yeah.
I was 31.
So
was how much?
Well, as all of our current attendees could probably attest, we're having a little bit of fun here before we start, but certainly we're looking forward to a great discussion here. Welcome everyone to Undivided Dialogues presented by Big West Undivided. This is a speaker series meant to deepen the understandings of the issues faced by underrepresented groups. Today, our topics are anti-racism and decolonization. To bring together our four panelists here that you can see for a discussion that we hope will educate and inspire you to think about these topics of discussion a little bit more deeply. I'm Chris Hargraves. I work with the Big West Conference, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. For all of our attendees, and I see we already have a question in the queue, so that'll be fun to answer later. There is no chat function, so that you can ask questions through that Q&A portal. We'll reserve the last 15 minutes of our discussion here to answer those questions. We'll try to get through many of those as we can. So now let's introduce our panelists. So you can probably scroll over your mouse and see their names as well, and they're in the panel discussion there. But first, from Cal State Fullerton, head women's basketball coach, Jeff Harada. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, happy to be here, appreciate it.
And on my left of the screen, but we don't know how everyone's screens are situated, but we have two student athletes and two members also of our Big West Undivided committee. Vanessa Austin, who also is the education subcommittee head on our Undivided. So Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, I'm excited to be here.
And Evan Smith from UC Santa Barbara, who is our Big West Undivided Vice Chair. So Evan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here as well.
And I should mention that Vanessa Austin is from CSU Bakersfield. I don't know if I said that or not. So I want to make sure that you get the shout out there as well. So, and finally, of course, Jen Frye. She runs Jen Frye Talks, a social justice education firm that uses conversations to educate and empower those within athletics. We are so happy to have Jen joining us today, live from Las Vegas. She is on vacation, but she is willing to come on today. So Jen, thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate y'all having me, Big Westers. And also Vanessa, y'all's president is on giving you the shout out. So I'm just saying the president of your university is on here talking about you. You big time. Can I get your autograph later? Oh, Chris, thank you for allowing me to be on with such a big time person. Just saying.
Whenever Vanessa comes around anywhere, it is a big time moment. So that's why we're here. And so yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you were able to meet her more than anything else. So. Well, let's get into our conversation today. I know that in our subject matter, even though we've had a lot of fun here, our subject matter obviously is very serious, but obviously we'll try to, obviously stay on task, stay on time. We'll be here for about an hour with our discussion. First thing I want to do here is, define some of the things that we'll be talking about today. Let's start first with anti-racism and threw up the slide here so everybody can see. Jen, let's let's go to you here to kind of walk us through anti-racism and also why it's important to define these terms before we get into it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I think it's really critical that before we even talk about anything, we have a definition so that we all have a common language. I want you to think, if you're an athlete or a coach, your first day, right? There's a handbook of language, of offense, of defense, of rules, of procedures. So everyone has the same body of knowledge. And when we're talking about these type of words of race, racism, colonialization, all of that, we want to have the same body of language. So it's really critical that we define them. And it's also critical that we understand that if you get to define words, you have power. And many people are like, well, that's just the definition. No, somebody define that. Right. So understand it's all about power. It's all about control. It's all about setting parameters of what people can do and can't do. And I think one of the important things when we think about defining, we think about maybe the social construction of crime. And who gets to define what crime is and who defines what crime isn't, right? If we think about wage theft, for instance, if I worked at the Gap and I went into the register and took $100, I'm going to be arrested for theft. But if the Gap takes $100 out of my paycheck for improperly payment, they're not going to get in trouble. Right? They get to define what theft is and what theft isn't. And so I say that when we talk about these definitions of fully situating ourselves with who gets to decide what words mean and the power that words have. So when we talk about anti-racism, it's a word that everyone's talking about. It's a pretty big buzzword. And so we have to look at it as it's not passive, right? Y'all can't be a passive athlete. I coach volleyball. Of the 6 people on there, you can't be passive. You can't be a passive basketball player. You can't be a passive track athlete, right? So nothing in our sports can be passive. And that's the same thing with anti-racism. Anti-racism is very aggressive, right? It's not just about saying, well, you know, I see something going on, but that's not my problem. I'm not part of it. No, anti-racism is actively, aggressively seeing systems, organizations, policies, and procedures and saying who is being disproportionately affected by it and how do we need to shift and change it. And it's not you in a classroom or in your locker room or in your office saying, well, that's not me. That's not my problem. I'm not racist, versus saying, what can I actively and aggressively do to change things so that marginalized populations can have equity? And so when people are thinking about anti-racism and thinking, well, am I doing the work? Ask yourself, when something's on the line, are you willing to say something? A woman I work with, Dr. Victoria Ferris, always talks about allyship has consequences. So anti-racist work has consequences. And if you understand the consequences and you're willing to have them, then you are doing the work.
Thank you, Jen. I mean, that was a great the definition of that. And I want to throw it over to Jeff, especially as a coach of a team. Hearing that kind of definition, how does that kind of mesh with the message you send to your team about anti-racism, or if any message you sent to them about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jen hit it on the head with just being aggressive and not passive. I think one thing that a lot of people, or a lot of us are guilty of is, we, through our lives, we often, whether consciously or unconsciously, we categorize people into several groups, or categories based on their relationship to us. Those who are close to us or important to us, those we don't know, and those who we find it difficult to be with or actively dislike. And this unconscious patterns and these labels, they're the fuel for racism. Because we allow things of, this is my friend, I know they don't mean it that way, so it's okay. Whereas someone else who you dislike could say the same thing. Oh, that person's racist. So I think being consistent with our team, I think that's the message, that we try to have in our program with our team, supporting each other. And, it's socially acceptable, right? What's right, what's wrong. I think, for the most part, we all know this in our hearts, but practicing what we know, being sensitive to those around us, because we all come from different places. In athletics, that's the beauty of athletics, right? We all come from different backgrounds, different places, and the common goal is for us to all come together in pursuit of one common goal. So, anything that we can do as coaches and mentors, and adults to kind of foster that environment and that atmosphere, to make it comfortable for people to be themselves and not be in fear or not think that, there's something going on. I think that's, as a coach, that's what we try to do.
And I want to kind of turn it over to our student athletes here, because a lot of the times I'm sure you guys hear like, oh, I'm not racist from, peers, from other people. So how do you combat that? And I'll start off with Evan first. How do you combat that when you hear it so casually? Especially since it's been such a buzzword lately to be anti-racist. So how do you combat it when you get in a situation where you see it so casually?
That's a great question. So I think there's no such thing as being neutral in relation to race. Personally, I think anti-racism is being intentional and like being intentionally conscious of the unconscious behaviors within our society. So that means like going to conversations like these, or like talking to people, confronting people when they say racist things. So confronting racist, you asked like what do you think like confronting racism is? I think being able to be vulnerable and putting yourself in an uncomfortable position is the way to go, because it's the right way to be, if that makes sense. Should I clarify a little bit more?
No, you're good. That was great. And Vanessa, what do you think?
I agree with Evan, but personally for me, I just think going into a situation open-minded, I feel like, it's hard to be vulnerable, but going in open-minded is the only way that we're gonna fight this and get through to people. And I also think holding each other accountable is huge. I mean, that's something that we preach on our basketball team all the time, whether it's making layups, missing layups, going to class, we need to hold each other accountable. And I think that holds true in this situation even more. So definitely being open-minded and holding each other accountable is huge.
Jen, something that Vanessa said about being vulnerable to, to looking within yourself as maybe you should be changing your behavior. So why is it so difficult for people to be vulnerable and to be open, despite the fact you hear anti-racism as a buzzword so often?
Because you don't want to admit that you've caused harm. Like, bottom line, it's really painful, right, for someone to come up and say, Chris, you hurt me. Like, when my friend says that, I am devastated. And so it's hard when someone comes up and said, what you said was problematic. And it takes a lot. Like, what we don't realize is how much we've been socialized through our families, our parents, media, things we've heard, things we've said. Like, we're socialized. Right? Maybe people are like, no, this is all me. I'm by myself. No, baby. That's the reason why you're not walking around naked. It's because you've been socialized to wear clothes all the time. And so we have to realize we've been socialized in all these different ways. And it's hard when people are saying like, what you said was problematic, especially if it's someone that we're close by, a friend, a partner, a family member. And to be vulnerable and say, Vanessa, I apologize. Tell me more. I need to learn from it. Like, that's a really hard step for people to do, especially adults, to admit even to one of their athletes that they've created harm. So what you'll tend to see is that, say a coach yelled at Evan in front of the group, they'll usually pull Evan aside and be like, hey, Evan, I apologize. No, coaches, y'all need to apologize in front of the group. You chastise in front of the group, you apologize in front of the group. If you've created harm, you have to admit it, because you're always role modeling. And so it's just hard to be really self-reflective and be like, man, I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was actually creating harm. And that's like what Vanessa said and Evan said, like, you have to be vulnerable to when someone says, hey, what you said hurt me, and be like, instead of being defensive and be like, no, you know me, instead of being like, okay, I apologize. Tell me more. How can I be better? Like, that's really vulnerable. And I think if we start talking and thinking that way, we can create more change, because we're going to be more self-reflective.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And I think that our panel here especially has said that, being vulnerable, being open, and trusting in yourself to make change, I think are the three takeaways that we can gather from this. And I kind of want to wrap at least this part of the conversation up with, what is the end? Is there an end goal for anti-racism? Is there something that everyone wants to look for that's tangible, that shows people that this is something that people should be doing? I'll start off with Jeff for this one.
Yeah, great question. I mean, personally, I think the end goal needs, in a perfect world, everybody living in harmony together. That would be a great end goal. But I think realistically, it's just, you know, eliminating the systemic bias and racism that exists in America. I think that has to be something that we have to work for. I mean, small steps are obviously being taken here and there, and we'll get into that, further along in the conversation. Um, but the more we can do to educate, people, and to, really go out of our way, and, like Jen said earlier, just be aggressive with it and not stand for it and not accept, you know, conscious or unconscious racism. I think, you got to say something and you got to stand up for what you believe in. And if everybody, it's so easy to say, but if everybody could just live by the golden rule, right? I mean, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. I wish it was as easy as that, but it's just not. And I know we're going to get into other topics and other areas, coming up soon, but that would be my quick answer to that.
And actually, that's a good segue to the next part of our conversation, colonialism and decolonization, right? And I'll go back to Jen on this one so that we can we'll bring it up on the screen here. And so Jen, walk us through colonialism, and then we'll get through decolonization, and then we'll start up the conversation from there.
Yeah, we only have 45 minutes, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna give a few seconds for this. But we have to understand everything came from somebody, from some culture, right? Like we talk about, well, it's always been the way, this is always the way it's been, or tradition. Tradition has been very Eurocentric. If we look at who has been taking over countries, who has been colonizing, we have to think about whose culture has been uplifted, right? Whose culture that says my afro is not appropriate, that my name is Jen Frye is going to get me jobs. And if my name was Tawana, that's not going to get me jobs, right? So understanding that there is literally a culture that's uplifted and that's also pushing down other folks' culture. It's why when we talk about history is, was it said, history is written by the victors. So that means it's going to be a very whitewashed aspect of history. It's not going to have a lot of Native voices, Black voices, Indigenous voices, Asian voices. It's only going to be written in one way. And so understanding that can then go to the decolonization, because if you don't know where it's come from, you can't change it, right? If you don't know how the system is working, you can't change or destroy the system. And so when we talk about colonialization, it's talking about this system that pushes one culture up and says, this is the way everyone should live, and pushes other cultures down.
And now decolonization. So now that Jen has kind of given us the quick view of decolonization there, Jen, what about, how do we take that and break down the social constructs for decolonization?
Right. So when we talk about decolonization, we essentially are talking about a lot of indigenous aspects. When we talk about Hawaii, right? Centering Native people and their experiences, their knowledge, their culture. And so when we're talking about this aspect of realizing that the Western way, the Eurocentric way, is not the best way or the only way, it's a way. And so when we're talking about, especially within the US construct, we have to think about, what does it mean for indigenous people, their knowledge, their culture, their religion to be lifted up? And to be not just a point of view, but also centering it. There's a theory called standpoint theory, and it says the most marginalized have the best view of society. So the most marginalized, Black people, brown people, indigenous, have a really good view of society and the things we need to tear down to uplift those voices, right? If we think about accessibility, standpoint theory, people in wheelchair and crutches have the best view if a building is accessible. Not me, who can walk, run, jump, or hop, right? I don't have a good view. The best view is somebody who's in a wheelchair, because they can tell us what's not working and what is working. So the same thing, we're talking about decolonization. We talk about culture. Whose culture can we start looking at with a different lens and pushing forward?
I'll go to the student athletes for this one. So now that we've defined colonization, decolonization, and we'll start with Evan on this one. How often have you been in situations that someone said, well, this is always the way? Is it now the time for you to start challenging that, especially as a student athlete having a voice? How do you challenge that? How do you challenge someone saying it's always been done this way?
Well, I think the best way to challenge that is just to have that conversation. I think as a as me, I was growing up, I was always raised to be docile and never to be confrontational and never to raise any kind of questions about how the society is. So honestly, I think just having like a comfortable, not uncomfortable, uncomfortable conversation with someone is the way to go. Hearing the point of view and then putting your point of view into it, and then maybe having like a conversation where you're saying, hey, I recommend you reading this, or hey, I recommend you saying listening to this. I think that like progress is made, and like and saying when people say that this is the way it is and this is the way it's going to be is through education and letting them know that there is a possibility for a better future.
I want to follow up on something you said actually about being raised to be docile. So how did you change that mindset? How did you go from being docile to being someone with a voice?
I'm gonna have to say George Floyd. After that horrific video, I decided that it's not okay. Like I cannot just stand on the sidelines and watch it happen repeatedly. And I want a better future for everyone, for the people standing right next to me, for my kids, for my grandkids. And I just want an equitable society where I don't have to feel for my brothers or my sisters or other or like people I don't even know. I want to be safe. I want people to be safe. That's why I decided not to be docile anymore.
And Vanessa, kind of playing off of that, how hearing that from one of your peers, how difficult is it to go through this process? Well, how difficult do you think it is for this go through this process for alone? But knowing that you have people like that who are willing to stand up and to speak up, how much more power does that give you to do the same?
Oh, that gives me so much more power because personally, I'm a person that hates confrontation. Like I will avoid it at all costs. But to know that I have somebody on my level, a student athlete who is speaking up and who is standing right next to me and lifting me up makes me feel 10 times better. I mean, that's the only way we're going to get our thoughts and our feelings across is by uplifting each other. I mean, just taking one person with you and planting that seed and having them come along with you can go a long way. So to know that Evan is standing right next to me, using her voice, is only going to make me use my voice and bring somebody with me.
And Jeff, as a coach, what kind of responsibility do you have to share this point of view with your players and to cultivate this kind of culture with your players?
Talking about Hawaii, I'm from Hawaii and I grew up there and was born and raised, and we learn about the Hawaiian culture a lot growing up, going to elementary school, and we learn a lot about it, and it just it's sad to see how things have happened, not just for the native Hawaiian people, but for the American Indians who inhabited North America prior to Europe coming over and turning into the United States of America. It blows my mind that someone can come and take over somewhere where people are already living, and claim it as their own, and then decolonize them. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, I think one big thing, going back to this is how it's always been. I mean, to me, the biggest response I have for that is just we need to eliminate the implicit bias that exists in the American culture. And it starts from systemic discrimination, in the legal system, law enforcement, biased portrayals of people of color, in the media. We grow up with these negative stereotypes of people of color, and they're constantly being reinforced, even as we try to change them. But these messages over time, when they're repeated, they create this association in our mind that instills racism and prejudice, maybe unconsciously without us even knowing it. That's what implicit bias is, right? Just by being in our society, I mean, we reinforce concepts in our mind and our brains that link, you know, certain things. We link category of black is bad, dangerous or less than, even if we don't believe it, consciously. And that, to me, is part of the issue. Rewriting policies, making changes, explicit societal changes, for racial equality is definitely what we have to do and very important. But I think if we truly want to change the way race is perceived in our society and culture, we really got to be aware of and work to shift our beliefs and associations at the implicit level.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And Jen, I want to actually focus this question to you is how much does unconscious bias play into colonialism? I mean, the very idea that Jeff was talking about of how, people can grow up and say black is bad. I mean, I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood and I felt as though I didn't see a lot of black kids around because I was told that, they lived on another side of town. So how difficult is it to break down these constructs if it's so ingrained within us?
Oh, it's difficult as hell. Like the first issue is admitting you have bias. People will fight tooth and nail and be like, I don't have bias. I love everyone. No, everyone has bias. Like we are socialized. When someone is pregnant, what's the first thing they say? What are you having, a boy or girl? No, tell me. Like, and I don't know if anyone has kids on here, but like, if you're like, no, I just want to know, I just want to have a baby. They're like, no, you will tell me what the gender is because they have to have that boy, Chris, right? They want to know, right? If it's a boy or a girl, if it's a boy, these are the things that will go with it. If it's a girl, these are the things that will go. And people want to start those binaries so quickly. And so we have biases about everything. What's appropriate clothing, hair, skin color, earrings, names, cities, street names. Like we have biases about everything. I think the first step is to admit we have biases because then we can start pushing against them. But if you don't want to admit you have biases, you can't change anything, right? And so that's like the very first thing is to admit I have biases. How are they showing up? How are they showing up when I interact with people? How are they showing up if I'm a coach with my black and brown athletes, with my white athletes, with those that I supervise, with those that supervise me? And really starting to think, okay, I have biases. How are they showing up? Now, how do I work on them? PBS has a really good like video series and it talks about, okay, if I mention peanut butter, what immediately do you think of? Jelly. And so when they talk about it, when you mention black man, criminalization, like all these immediate biases that are connected to it. And so the quicker you can say, I have biases, the more you can start thinking about them, seeing how they show up so that you can shift them.
And I'm actually, one thing, a real world example of this, I think, and it kind of plays into, is there a point where you go too far? Can you go too far on the pendulum of trying to bring on the constructs? And one of the things I want to ask the group here is that, so the movie In the Heights, right? Lin-Manuel Miranda, huge advocate of the Latinx community, of the Afro-Latino community, is under fire because he did not have dark enough Latin people within his movie. So, but for someone that has done so much in the community and getting that kind of backlash, is there a too far in this too? Or is this, we have to kind of rethink about literally every single area that we're a part of to see where we fall short? And Jenna, I'll start with you for that one, and then I'll go to Evan for the next part of it.
I don't think it's too far. We have been socialized in so many ways. We have to deconstruct so much stuff. And Lin-Manuel should absolutely be under fire, right? It's not that there aren't dark enough people in the movie. It's that the darker people are only background dancers. They're in the nail salon. They are not in leads, right? And we always hear this idea of, well, we just hired the best person for the job or the role. But why is the best person always lighter skin toned, right? We have to really deconstruct that. Why is that always the best person is white passing? If you look at all the leads for In the Heights, they're all light skinned. And so he should be pushed back on that, because there were darker people I read that were in the auditioning. They just were not picked. So I think this is a good point of there is no good or bad person, right? So many people are like, well, I'm just a good person, they're a bad person. No, good people can do harm, bad people can do good things. So this is a good point of someone who's done some excellent work in past movies and in Hamilton, which I still haven't seen. Don't hate me about it. I know.
Come on, Jen.
I know. I was going to see it in Chicago and then COVID happened. That's my excuse.
It's on Disney Plus.
Like, Okay, I'm gonna have to watch it. I'm gonna watch it. But like he's done great things, but here he created harm. So this is a good example of we can always do really good things, but in moments if we don't critically analyze, we can also create harm. And then once somebody tells us we've created harm, how do we then handle that? That's the biggest thing. I'm gonna be interested to see what Lin-Manuel does now.
And Evan, the reason I wanted to go to you for this, I wanted to get a younger opinion on this as well. Is there a point?
I just turned 41, Chris. I am a very young
same
41.
age, remember, Jen?
Don't even play, Chris. A young 41, baby.
We're the same age, remember? Evan, but you may or may not have seen it or the movie, but what do you think about something like that in a situation like that, in which, someone gets criticized because they don't have enough of a particular, type of person, race, ethnicity in a role, or have you ever been in a situation, particularly maybe in the soccer field, where you look at a team, you say, well, there's no people of color on this team, so I don't know what this team's all about. So what have you been in that kind of situation?
I'll answer the latter question first. I have been in that situation. I played club soccer my whole entire life, and SoCal soccer is predominantly white, and I'm like, oh, I don't see any kind of ethnicity in these teams. But I that was how I was raised. I was just accustomed to it, and I just didn't think twice about it until, like I told you, like George Floyd, when I woke up, I was unwoken by tragedy, I guess. And to say, I think that the question about Lin-Manuel, I think that's how you say his name. My dad watched the movie. I was not paying attention to it. I don't know. I feel like there was like there was not a limit. I think that if you're not self-critical of yourself, then I think there's room for other people to criticize you. So if you're not like checking your actions, then you can act like somebody can come in and tell you, and not in like a horrible manner, like don't cancel them. I don't believe in cancel culture, but I do believe in like someone having some kind of criticism towards you, and you can adjust your actions from there so you can move on to the future and be better for it.
Thank you, Evan. And I think that this is a pretty good segue to the next part of this conversation about working together. And we've all seen the rise of hate crimes against the Asian American population, to go along with the consistent violence of the Black-Brown population. So there's always been this question of how do we get better for each group, or how do they work together? And I'll start, Jen, I'll start with you on this one, and then I'll get it over to Jeff. But is there a way for that to happen, and how does that happen?
Oh, we have coalition building going back decades, right? When we saw, is it Fred Hampton from the Black Panthers? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm blanking on the movie name. Jesus and the Black Messiah.
Yeah. Well, Hampton, he was coalition building with poor whites, poor Latinx, poor Asian, and that was one of the reasons why he was murdered by the FBI. Coalition building has always been happening between Black, brown folks, always. And when we saw that Atlanta murder, we saw NBC who was like, "Well, what are Black people doing about this?" And it's like, baby, we've always been supporting our Asian folks. And when you see people, they all of a sudden start trying to separate us. Well, like, what are Latinx people do? What are doing Black people doing? We didn't commit the murders in Atlanta. So it should be like, what are white people doing about whiteness? Right? It shouldn't be this aspect of like, well, what are Black people doing? We are all coalition building. And so when issues are happening, they're all going to affect us in different ways. Anti-racist work is very different, right? It's different for anti-Blackness. It's different for anti-Latinx. It's different for anti-Asian. And the more we understand there are differences, the more we can say, what are these differences look like? And how can we coalition build so that we can push against white supremacy together? Because this is all affecting us, right? When we talk about deportation, it's not just affecting Latinx people, it's affecting Asian folks, right? It's affecting Black folks. And so really looking at what does coalition building, especially for our student athletes, y'all have power. So you need to coalition build with your Black and brown friends, with your white friends, and say, what does coalition building look like to push against white supremacy and to push against these policies and procedures and the way it's always been, to enact change to give you a better student athlete experience. And that is what needs to be centered when we're talking about student athlete coalition building is what will create a better student athlete experience, centering the Black and brown experiences. Because if the Black and brown experience is great, then everyone's experience will be great.
Vanessa, let's go to you real quick for this one. What does coalition building look like for you? Have you, what approaches have you taken and your peers have taken towards coalition building?
I think just buying in to what we're doing. I feel like that's a huge thing. If you don't buy into what you're trying to fight against, then what are we here for? So I feel like just the people that I surround myself with, whatever we're talking about, whatever issue we're trying to tackle, I just want them to be able to buy in. And like I said before, I just want them to plant the seed into the next person so that it just goes around and the education spreads around. Because I'm huge on education. You said I'm the education subcommittee. Like, that is what I do. I'm huge on education. So just being able to educate the people around me and have them go out and educate the people that are around them so that we can all come together and build something great.
And Jeff, we'll go to you for this one. And in terms of building, as you said, building something great, you're the head coach of a team. So how do you build that kind of coalition within your team and put together all of those different kinds of backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think what we need to embrace, I think what people need to embrace now is just, I think demographically, this nation is honestly becoming less white, right? And the dominant, black-white paradigm of race relations, it's being challenged by the growth of increasing visibility of, Hispanic and Asian, race issues now. Bring up the Asian American violence. It's been around. It hasn't just happened. Obviously, coronavirus and what President Trump said about calling it the Kung flu and all that stuff. I mean, obviously that doesn't help things, but there's been anti-racism against Asian Americans for a long time. And personally, I've experienced it. My grandfather was in World War II. And yeah, it's hard for me to talk about it because my grandma would tell me the stories, but my grandfather fought in the war. He was part of the 442nd Brigade, fought for this country, and when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, they were all put in internment camps, right? They were boarded up, and I think that's the most disappointing thing for me. But going back to just what we talked about in Hollywood, we talked about that movie, and but that's been an issue in Hollywood for forever, right? I mean, you had Asian characters being portrayed in movies by non-Asian actors and actresses. That even happens, up until this day. Lead roles in an Asian-based movie go to non-Asian actors and actresses. So why is that happening? But I mean, we can talk about that forever. But to go back to your question, yeah, I just feel like we really need to come together, as people of color, as a group, like Jen was saying. The fact of the matter is racism exists, right? It's here. We all know that. How do we address it? How do we address the injustice? I mean, President Biden just signed that COVID-19 Hate Crime Act into effect, and that's a great thing. But is that enough? I don't think so, right? We need to do more. We need to find out what the root causes of systemic racism are and oppression, and really put pressure on, law enforcement and governments to actually prosecute these crimes. How many of these crimes get swept under the rug? I mean, does it really matter? Those are questions that I have. But yeah, I don't know if does that answer your question that you were asking?
It does, yes.
Sorry,
And actually,
on my own there for a while.
No, that's fine. And I think that you bring up a great point, because I think that, and I'll go to Evan actually for this one. After the Derek Chauvin trial, there was kind of a muted celebration by in the Black community that, yes, this one police officer is going to jail, but there's so many more in that time in which there have met no kind of repercussions. So Evan is someone, sorry, Jen, younger. And when you're thinking about this, how sometimes it's demoralizing when you see things like this. So how do you keep yourself going? How do you keep pushing forward that, if you see only one person get, that's held responsible for a crime, and yet so many others are not? How do you keep moving forward?
There's a couple of things. So one being that I have hope for the future. And the other two is patience and urgency, like knowing when to be patient and knowing when to be urgent with my like actions. Right now, I know that with our committee, Big West Undivided, we would have to be patient in the process of building it, and then but we're urgent in like the actions of the voting initiative, or like if something happened in the Asian community, we rolled out something immediately. Like I think that being tired is not like something that I have a problem with. I think it's the balance between patience and urgency, knowing when to be instant and knowing when to be calm. And did I answer that question?
Yes, good.
Okay.
Very well.
Thank you.
Jen, and what Evan said there, knowing when to be patient and knowing when to have urgency. There's no playbook for that, but how can knowing the difference between the two make a movement more effective?
First off, I am the most impatient human in the entire world, right? If I have an Amazon package coming, I am checking my door every single time. I am, checking my email to see when I'm getting that. I am the most impatient person. But I also completely agree with this aspect between patience and urgency, and also understand that everyone has a role in the fight, right? It's not that just everyone's on the front line with signs, or people are getting arrested for civil disobedience. Like everyone has a role, and really understanding that. Are you someone that maybe is always going and talking to the AD or the president and saying, hey, these are things we need to push forward, but you're maybe not vocal on the front lines, right? You're getting your head coach to change policy, but maybe you're not posting stuff. And so really understanding that we all need different actors doing this work, but we have to make sure that we're not just rushing stuff to have something done today, but really we're looking at three different things. We want scalable, systemic, and sustainable, right? Those are the three things we want to focus on. Scalable, can we make this bigger, bigger, bigger? Systemic, so that it's not just one thing, but it's multiple things that are going through the whole culture. And sustainable, that if I leave or Jeff leaves or Evan leaves or Chris leaves, that it will keep going on and on and on. And those are the three things that we have to push forward, and we have to have an urgency. Like it's easy to sit back and be like, man, all these things are happening, I'm just going to sit back. You have to like have that urgency and keep pushing forward, because understanding that it might not be one of your identities today, but tomorrow it very much will be one of your identities, right? I am a half Black, half woman. I identify 100% as a Black woman. I was also undocumented my first 10 years here. So DACA is actually, I'm a year too old for that. But so for me, things when we're talking about immigration, I have a huge urgent push forward because I was that undocumented person at one time. So again, there are times where it might not be your identity this time, but tomorrow it will definitely be one of your identities. So that's why we are always pushing forward no matter what.
And, kind of playing off that, part of that is the, construction of, DI committees, plans of actions, things of that nature. But, everyone's always asking what our specific DEI committees or kinds of action do. So we thought it'd be important here to kind of differentiate that. And then thanks to Lily Zhang for this, because I found this. And I think this and I start here with Jen on what constitutes a DI working group, and a DI task force. And I think that what you just said kind of encompasses this right here. So kind of walk us through this a little bit, and then we'll kind of we'll ask some questions of our other panelists here of how this can be applied to groups that they are a part of.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I'm always going to say this: if you are a Black or brown person and you're on one of these things, you need to get paid for your labor. Like point blank, end of story. If they are asking you to do the emotional labor while you are processing your pain, you need to be paid for it. And I hear so many athletic departments are like, we don't have the money. No, you have the money. If you expect a traumatized employee, staff member to be doing this work for free, that is unacceptable. We need to pay Black and brown people for the labor, the emotional toll that they have to do every day going to do this work while they are processing their pain. When George Floyd happened, if you're asking Black people to be on these, they are processing that pain. If they have Black sons, Black dads, Black brothers, you need to pay them. Right? If they're Asian and after the Atlanta shootings or during all the anti-Asian violence, you are asking them to be on these things, you need to pay them for that toll. I want to be very clear. You cannot expect free emotional labor from Black and brown people anymore. It's unacceptable. And so I think the main thing when we're talking about these each individually between the committee, the working group, and the task force is really understanding at the end of the day, what is it that we want? Because so many times people develop these and they don't have a clue what they want. And so what they'll have is they'll have a volunteer group on a task force with a $500,000 budget. Ain't no one got a clue what's going on. So athletic department at school, you literally have to say, what is our end goal? Take a step back, take a breather and not be like, we have to put something together immediately. No, what is our end goal? How are we going to fund it? And who are the best people to be on it? Not the big names, but the best people who are self-reflective, understand their identities. That's the people to put on these. And so to think, like I said, what is it we want to accomplish? What aspect would be the best at this point? How are we going to fund it? And who are we going to put on it? So thinking about it, depending on what is long-term, medium-term, short-term, right? Like thinking, what is our end game and starting from there.
And Evan, I'll go to you for this because you were on our Undivided committee as vice chair, and you know we can kind of talk about that a little bit of what is the end game, what are we working toward, for our Undivided group, and I think that if you want to kind of talk about what our group has done and kind of where we're going at the time.
Yes, of course. I'm a little biased, but I'm actually really proud to be a part of Big West Undivided. I think we've done a substantial amount of work this year, and Vanessa can attest to that. She's done a great job on the education subcommittee. I think one of our end goals is what Jen said: sustainability, sustainable, an equitable environment for our athletes, for our staff members, so everybody can feel comfortable being who they are. And I think that cultivating that environment can have so many advantages for our communities, for individuals within our institutions. And I think that from there we can have like an athletic department where athletic system where people can prosper. And some things that we have done, the voting initiative, which I'm really proud of. We did that in the first couple of months of forming the group. We also have done an awesome website on the Big West Undivided, attributed to the holidays of different cultures. We're doing the speaker series right now, which is an empowerment subcommittee. And I'm just so proud of you guys. So thanks for letting me speak on that.
And Vanessa, yeah, we kind of the same thing with same question to you that we posed to Evan. I know that you lead one of our subcommittees. So how does the work that you do on Undivided, how can you take that back to campus in order to have effective DEI initiatives?
That's a good question. I think personally for me, taking the stuff that my group has done back to CSUB is huge. I mean, recognizing that everybody celebrates different holidays and everybody has different traditions is huge. And I think that they should be highlighted and they should be celebrated in a way. And we should hear from people who actually celebrate them. So that's definitely something that I will be bringing back to my campus. And I want it to last, just like Evan said. I think that this year on the DEI committee, it was a lot of grunt work and a lot of foundation building, which at times I know the student athletes were kind of like, we want action, like, but we had to take a step back and realize that this is our first year doing this. And if we want it to last, we need to build a good foundation. And so, after all of that, we kind of came to the conclusion that, this was a good building off year. And we hope that next year and the years to come that we see action and we see change. We see our 4 pillars come to life.
Jeff, how important is it to have that kind of attitude from student athletes as they work toward this long-term change and being a part of these committees, and and what can you learn as well from them for what they've said today about what they can take forward.
Oh, really important. I'm so impressed with both Vanessa and Evan, and just their well thought out answers, and it's their honest answers. We didn't have, it's not like these are scripted or anything like that. These two young women are speaking from their hearts, and I think that's what it's coming from them, what's deep down inside, and you take those things seriously. As a coach, one of the big things we always talk about is we need to listen, right? As a coach, we're so used to barking out orders and instructing and giving boom, 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 and there's times where we need to listen, and these are the times where as coaches we need to listen to what is on the hearts and minds of our students. What's important to them, what are they struggling with, how can we help, what can we do going forward to help, because it'd be a shame, like they were saying, especially what Vanessa was saying, if we do all this because of what's been happening, and then all of a sudden, okay, it's done, over with, let's move on. We did something. We got to keep this going. It can't be a one-time thing. It can't be a temporary thing. It has to be an all-time thing if we want to create change. And I think we have some very capable and educated student athletes at our institution, and obviously across the Big West, and I fully support whatever they want to do, and I think we need to continue these things, not just the rest of this year, but years and years to come. And if we can get some kind of grant or some kind of thing from the conference to really help us out, I think that would be great.
I mean, this conversation has been great, and as Evan said, we got to stay on task and stay on time. So I want to give everyone a quick 10 seconds to give kind of what you hope that our attendees have taken away from this conversation. So I'll start first with Evan. Go ahead.
Chris, you keep on picking on me. You keep on telling me to go host.
You're the best. You're first in my group here.
Okay. Well, I actually really enjoyed Jen's full steps to moving forward. Is it 3 or I think it's 3: scalable, systematic, and sustainable. I think I'm gonna put that into our DEI committee and like really enforce that, because I feel like that's super influential. So thank you so much, Jen.
Vanessa, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to everybody on this panel. I mean, this has been great. This has been eye-opening. I was talking to Evan yesterday, and we were so nervous about this, and we were like, we don't know some of these definitions, and oh my gosh, and I can't believe he's putting us on the spot. But it's great to be put on the spot, I guess. I mean, it opens for a good conversation, and I just want to thank you guys for letting me be a part of this. This has been great, and I'm going to try to take this back to CSUB and do some work there. Thank you.
Jeff, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky and blessed to be a part of this conversation. I was asked by one of our student athletes, Carolyn Gill, if I could, participate, and I said absolutely. This is something I believe in. Again, showing support, for our student athletes in any way possible. And like I said, going forward, I'm here to help out, to be supportive. With anything I can do. I want to thank Jen, Vanessa, Evan, and also you, Chris, just for hosting. It's been very educational for me. I've learned a lot. Hopefully what I said made a little bit of sense, but just listening to you guys, it's inspiring, and I'm very lucky that I was able to be a part of this today.
Jen?
Yeah, I have a few things. Student athletes, if you're on here, you all are badasses. Like y'all have so much information, literally you're badasses, and you need to use your voice more. You need to use your voice. You need to be loud. You need to advocate for yourself. Like you all are so amazing. If there are coaches or administrators on here, you need to listen to student athletes. You need to ask them what they need, what they want, and don't assume at all. Whatever it is you think, no, ask them. And I think the last thing is coalition building, right? Of saying, what things do we want? How can we specifically define it, and then push forward? So I just appreciate Vanessa, Jeff, Evan, Chris for allowing me to be on here. I'm not a big Wester. Even though I'm in Vegas right now, I'm not a big Wester, but I appreciate you allowing me to come on here. And so thank you very much.
So I wanted to, we unfortunately, Evan, I didn't keep on time. So we do have time for a few questions here. And the first one that we'll ask here is about the upcoming holiday, Juneteenth. And I want to address this to Jen. So how do we properly celebrate Juneteenth? Is there a proper way to celebrate Juneteenth?
Yeah, two ways. A, educate yourself on the origins of Juneteenth, what's going on, like educate yourself on Juneteenth. And the second thing is spend money at Black organizations, right? Buy things with Black organizations all the time. So I'd say those are the two big things. Educate yourself on what it is, educate yourself on how it's occurring where you live, and then spend money in Black organizations.
Thank you. And then two questions here that are actually very similar. They're about getting allyship with leaders, especially college athletics leaders. How can we create change in athletics if the lens is mostly white, and if the lens always has those people of color being in the leadership position of fighting racism? And I'll address that to Jen first.
So I found this quote. I was on NCORE, and it says, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So right now, the system of athletics and having everyone white, it's like 80% white in leadership. The system was built to do that. So we have to acknowledge this system to start deconstructing it. Right? It means that every single person, well, they're just the right fit for the job, can't always be white. It means that we are really deconstructing our job descriptions of where we put jobs, of mentorship programs, of, we are putting Black and brown people in leadership positions, but not giving them any support or mentoring, right? So we have to do those type of things to help Black and brown people flourish. There is a thing I heard on a podcast called Whiteness at Work, and it talked about the glass ceiling. And that like Black people always have this glass ceiling that they're pushing against, that they can't make any mistakes. They make a mistake and it breaks and they're going back down. And so really thinking about what that means for leadership, right? And who is able to make mistakes. We see a lot of white folks in leadership can make a ton of mistakes. We see assistant coaches, staff members, facilities, they don't get to make any mistakes, especially because they're Black and brown people majority. So really think about who has the ability to make mistakes and who can't make any mistakes at all. And also, like I said, leadership or mentorship, guiding folks, and also support. We need to put people, Black and brown people, in power, but also support and give mentorship. That's how we start deconstructing this system that was working perfectly as it was meant to work.
We're gonna get as much as we can out of Jen here, because there's another question here. The idea of paying student athletes and staff for emotional labor associated with DEI work. Do you have a specific example of, or a model of an athletic department that's found a way to do that given HR and compliance constraints?
There are no HR compliance with staff and coaches. How many bonuses do staff and coaches get? Staff and coaches get APR bonuses, attendance bonuses, championship bonuses, All-American bonuses. We can put bonuses in there for people who do that work. When it comes to athletes and compliance, I'm not a compliance person, but shirts, gifts, like asking what type of things can we give them for doing this work and putting it under the constraints. But like staff and coaches, we can give bonuses and stipends for them doing this work. Like we give too much money to football and basketball coaches for anything that they win or do. We can also give bonuses for doing this emotional labor.
Final question, also to Jen. Could you address the importance of critical race theory in education?
So I actually have this really good quote that's from Zeus Leonard's book. I think it's called Race Frameworks. And so you'll hear people talk about Marxism connected to critical race theory. And when people say that, you need to ask them, what do they mean? Because many people want to connect it and don't have a damn clue. And so when we're talking about Marxism and critical race theory, it says, even though Marxism is a failed political system, its ability to critique prevailing norms in the capitalist societies has contributed to the formulation of theories that examine the epistemological methodologically of social construction. And so that's what critical race theory does, is it looks at, it comes from a legal study, right? So critical race theory is talking about race as a social construct, whiteness is property, interest convergence. So we should be learning about it and also understanding if we talk about race in critical ways, we are talking about critical race theory. But if people are like, boo, critical race theory, ask them about the tenets, ask them if they know what they're talking about. Many times they don't. So that's what I just have to say about that.
What was that book that you just quoted, Jen?
It's by Zeus Leonard, and it's called Race Frameworks. And it talks about critical race theory in relation to different frameworks. And so many people are talking about CRT. So it's actually the theoretical framework I'm using for my dissertation on the racial experiences of professional Black volleyball players overseas. And so people are talking about it and they don't have a clue of what it means, right? So when we're talking about CRT and education, it's just talking about race in a more critical way of education, of legal studies, of medicine, of all of these aspects of saying like race is a foundational aspect and how can we be more critical about it?
So I know we're working over time, but I have one last question. I actually have to split it in half, unfortunately. With name, image, and likeness legislation on the horizon, how can departments ensure that an equity lens is applied as the NCAA changes that area? Also to Jen, sorry.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I was actually Googling the book to put it in the quote thing, so I didn't hear. I was trying to get the book title.
With name, image, and likeness legislation on the horizon, how can departments ensure that an equity lens is applied as the NCAA changes in that area?
I mean, the reality is it's Black and brown people, right, that are affected the most by that. If we look at football and basketball, that's who they're centering. And I think literally having Black and brown people, having women at the table making these decisions. Because as we saw, I think it was like in front of, I don't know, there were a few people that went in front of, I think, Congress or something, and it was all white men. And it's like, who is going to be affected by it? Have those people at the table? Have Black and brown folks and have their voices centered, have women have their voices centered. That's how you create equity. If you don't have the people who's going to be directly affected by it at the table, then there's never going to be equity because it's going to be more of a white savior complex of like, well, we know what's best for them and you really don't. So have those people at the table and have them being at the forefront of making the decisions, not, you know, they're asked after the decision's been made, but they are directly making the decisions.
Thank you again. Well, unfortunately, we got to end it there. We had a lot of great questions from our attendees. To all of you, thank you so much for taking the time to visit us today. Jen, Jeff, Evan, and Vanessa, you're all stars. Thank you so much for being honest and candid in the conversation today. And I think that was important. This has been Undivided Dialogues, and part of this whole initiative is having honest and open discussion. And I think we did that today. So I think that we all learned something. I think we all grew today. So I'm happy to be part of it. I can't wait for the next one. Stay tuned for for more information on that. But with that, I will release our panelists. And thank you very much for taking the time tonight to join us. And we'll talk all soon, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, Big Westers.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.